Welcome to the Sharing the Faith podcast, where every other week we explore the beauty and power of faith in Jesus Christ, the light of the world. Now here is your host, Dr. Tom Neal.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Tom Neal. It's good to be with you for another episode of Sharing the Faith, our bi-weekly podcast with the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. I'm the Chief of Evangelization and Mission Engagement for the Diocese, which is a very auspicious, kind of intimidating title. It means that I'm at the service of the bishop in his own mission of evangelizing or bringing the gospel to the people of this wonderful diocese that my wife, love so much. It's great to be with you, and this podcast will air during Easter, during the octave of Easter, the 8 days that constitute the beginning of the Easter season. And so, happy Easter, Christ is risen, as they say in Greek, Christos anesti, alethos anesti, which means Christ is risen, he is truly risen. So I hope the celebration of the Triduum, those 3 holy days, was sacred for you, and I hope your Easter season so far has been full of good things for you and your loved ones. Excuse me, lots of singing during the Triduum. My wife is a music director at Nativity of Our Lord in Pensacola, so my voice probably is getting shot from all the rehearsals and singing. But it's so good to be with you. And what I'd like to reflect on today, just me, is in this Easter season, I want to return back to the cross. Not to kind of look back and say, let's just set aside the resurrection and go back to the cross again, but to recognize that as Catholics, when Jesus rises from the dead, he doesn't just leave behind the cross. He doesn't just cast it aside and say, thank God that's over, let's move on to the better part. He takes the cross and transforms it. He transfigures it. He turns it, as the early church fathers love to say, from the tree of death into the tree of life, from a symbol of Roman oppression to a symbol of divine victory, to a symbol of shame, into a symbol of forgiveness and honor, because of the sacrificial love and mercy that Christ poured out on the cross. So when we think about Easter, we think about the cross brought as a victorious symbol, transformed now into the new creation, into the world that God is preparing for us, that Christ rose from the dead to inaugurate, to begin. And you think about it in the resurrection scenes, like on Divine Mercy Sunday, for example, when we read the Gospel from John, chapter 20, when Jesus appears to the 11 disciples who are gathered in the upper room, and Thomas is with them the second time he appears, the doubting Thomas, and Jesus shows Thomas the nail marks in his hands and the open side where the lance had pierced him so that Thomas would believe. But it's a remarkable thing to realize that Jesus kept the wounds of the crucifixion in his body in the resurrection. He didn't abolish them. He showed them to be symbols of his love and of his response to the problem of evil and suffering, the problem of pain. And they, in the beautiful symbolism of the resurrection, those open wounds become, you might say, the scars of the Good Shepherd. In the ancient world, if you were a shepherd who was hired by a Bedouin, one of the ways that you would get hired and get paid better wages was by the number of scars you had on your body that showed you were willing to pay a price for the sheep, that you were a good shepherd, not one that runs away when the first robber or wolf or lion comes along to try to devour them. You would fight for them and bear scars. So Jesus shows himself as the shepherd who is willing to bear scars to protect his sheep and to take the attacks himself. So lovely. So the cross isn't left behind, it's transformed, which is why when you go in a Catholic church, we don't have an empty cross, we have a crucifix. We have the body of Christ hanging on the cross, because that body on the cross is the same body in the resurrection that stands before the Father, and he forever shows the Father his wounds to remember the mercy that God has shown to us in response to our own evil, our own hatred, our own attempt to put God and a neighbor to death. So I'd like to reflect a little bit on this mystery today of suffering. Years ago, when I was teaching in the seminary at Notre Dame in New Orleans, that's why I wore my tie today. I taught in New Orleans at Notre Dame, so this is my Louisiana fleur-de-lis tie. I taught a class, an elective one semester called Pastoral Ministry to the Suffering, which was just reflecting on, for priests, future priests, what the faith does in terms of transforming the way that you approach human suffering whenever you approach it, whether it's in the hospital bed or it's in a nursing home or it's at a car accident or it's mental anguish after the loss of someone or whatever it is, how the faith itself should transform the way that ministry is carried out and the understanding of evil and suffering that we have. So it was a challenging course to teach because it's a tough topic. I think it's the most difficult thing to address as a Christian and as a Jew, as a person who believes in a God of justice and love, to try to talk about the problem of evil, especially monstrous evil in this world. So we did that, and it was really a great exercise. But one thing I realized at the end of it was just, how much I have to learn. Just how much there is to know. And I also realized, we talked a lot during that course about the word mystery, right? Our faith in God, we believe, is mystery. Like after the consecration at the altar, the priest says, the mystery of faith, right? Right there on the altar in the bread and wine which have been consecrated, there's a mystery present here. And mystery doesn't mean, an obscure, irrational thing that you can't understand, so don't even try, just accept it on faith. It's the opposite of that. Our faith is actually profoundly reasonable in a fundamental sense, right? We believe in the harmony of faith and reason, but we also believe that our faith in mystery is a faith in a God who is infinite, who's beyond all limitations, that our human mind, which is finite, can't go to the infinite and ever come to an end. So there's always more. There's always more. I like to say that faith opens the mind, awakens the mind, the reason, the intellect to a quest to the depths of the mystery of God and his creation and the problem of evil and all of these other things. And it goes on a quest that just never ends. Faith, I used to say, faith is like a perpetual Niagara Falls, right? Always overspilling the bounds of our limits, constantly. There's never a moment where you get to a point with God in this life or in heaven where you go, oh, okay, I get it now. Is there nothing else? It's limitless. So mystery also, though, means that what we believe in is not under our control. We don't manipulate it. We don't make it into what we want it to be. We simply receive it as it is, and it shapes us. We don't shape it. So I think of this friend of mine, for example, who became a priest that I've known for many, many years. And he worked for the State Department for many years, and he was assigned to Tunisia in North Africa, to the embassy there, and he was there for a couple of years. And right near where he was the ancient city of Carthage and the Mediterranean shore, and that's where Augustine used to be in North Africa. He was Bishop of Hippo in North Africa. And he would go along to this beach along the shore often, Augustine would, and he would walk up and down the beach as he would be thinking, for example, about some of the profound things he wrote. And so my friend, who was struggling with a call to priesthood, since he was young, he had felt a call to priesthood and resisted it and never felt worthy of it, and just, he struggled hard. And he was in his 30s at this point, and he couldn't shake this sense of calling to priesthood. And so one day he drove down and went to the beach where Augustine went, and he walked up and down and prayed and just said to the Lord, look, I ask you to either take away this desire for priesthood from me or make it clear to me that you want me to be a priest, because I just can't see myself there, but I can't shake it. So as he's walking up and down, he has this experience, he says, that he's never had anything like it before or after, where the sound of the waves and the sound of the water just goes quiet. And the waves are still going, but it goes quiet, and he's kind of a little disoriented by that. He thinks something wrong with me. And in that moment, he said, I heard a deep, strong, beautiful voice speak to me these words. And they were, my son, enter the mystery. Trust me. And that was it. And as soon as he heard those words, he knew it meant, don't try to figure it all out. Follow the sense of being led that you've been feeling since you were young, and just trust me. And so the next day he called up the vocation director in his diocese and flew back to the States, interviewed, and then gave up his job. And now he's been a priest for many years, 28 years now, and he's actually chaplain, or I think he still is now. He was chaplain of the State Department as a Catholic priest. So mystery, enter the mystery. This is what faith calls us to. There's something you have to surrender to and trust that you don't understand fully. You see it, but you don't see it totally. And there's so many things you think that will hold you back from going where he is leading you. But at a certain point, you just have to go. That's a sense of mystery. It involves trust and surrender, as well as, a sense of the grandeur and greatness and infinity of God. So all that to say, our faith leads us into the mystery of God. And our faith is not, I like to say this too, or I take this from other sources, our faith is not complicated. It's complex, but it's not complicated. It's very simple, right? It's very simple. It's a gospel that was proclaimed to the poor, right? To the uneducated. Jesus would travel. And the heart of the gospel, the heart of the mystery of God, it can be summed up in a single word. In 1 John, it's clear. God is love. So everything finds its simple meaning in love. Now, highly demanding once you realize what love is, because where do we learn what love is? The love that God is. Where do we learn that? Above all else, we learn that on the cross, right? The cross is the place where we see what constitutes divine love in a fallen, broken, sinful, violent world. What does love look like when it faces evil and suffering, pain and rejection? The cross is the symbol of that. St. Paul says that the whole gospel, in 1 Corinthians, he says the whole gospel can be summed up. The whole gospel means the whole teaching of Jesus, the whole revelation that God revealing himself, who we are, what our destiny is. All of it can be summed up in Greek, he says, the logos to staru, the word of the cross. That's the compressed language of God in its most perfect, complete form. And that's a paradox. If you look at what the crucifix is, it's a paradox. What does that even mean? I had a professor I knew when I was studying at Florida State, getting my PhD. There was a professor I knew who was agnostic. He said he was a lukewarm agnostic, which I think is funny. He was kind of open, and so he had never been in a Catholic church before, so I walked him into the church to show him St. Thomas More in Tallahassee. And I remember when I walked him in the church, we went over to the sanctuary and looked up, and there's the crucifix there. And I guess he had never seen like a life-size crucifix before in his life. Maybe he'd seen little ones or something. And he looks at it and he says, wow, y'all don't hide the problem of evil, do you? Okay, there's a naked man up there in the middle of your church. And I remember when I heard that, I was kind of shook me awake, because, when you look at a crucifix for year after year after year, you pray in front of it, it becomes kind of a beautiful work of art. You forget that it really is a stunning and terrifying symbol. Again, it was Roman oppression, right? The Romans used the cross, the crucifixion, as a way of keeping order, right? Keeping control and of warding off people doing things, committing crimes, committing treason against the empire and so forth, with that symbol of Roman power and oppression. So the cross is paradoxical, but yet it's a symbol of God's love. So let me tell you another story that I love. My father, who's deceased now, was Orthodox, was Eastern Orthodox, and I used to go to his church with him on Sundays whenever I was in town, or when I could. And his pastor, who was of Russian descent, it was a Russian community. It was an Orthodox Church of America, OCA they call it, but it was a Russian community. Anyway, the priest there, I'll never forget this. He gave a homily once, right around Roe versus Wade, so January, late January time, on abortion. He was preaching on pro-life and the abortion message of the Orthodox Church, which is the same as the Catholic Church. And he told a story. He shared a story about a woman he knew in Russia This is during the Soviet era, that she was pregnant, and in a fairly late part of her pregnancy, they discovered some kind of anomaly. Something was not right, and I think what he said was it was like preeclampsia. I can't remember the word, but there was a high risk that she would die in labor, giving birth to the child. So the doctor at this point recommended she have an abortion, which she wouldn't do. So she went through with it. And then she went into labor, and sure enough, during labor, she hemorrhaged and bled out, and she died. The child survived. And the father raised this child. And this child, as he became an adult, decided eventually to become a priest, an Orthodox priest. And so when he went through seminary, and when it came time for his ordination, before the ordination began at the cathedral, the father took him aside and said, I want to share something with you before, you're ordained a priest. And he pulled out a little Byzantine crucifix, and it was metal. And he showed it to him, and he says, I want to give this to you. And the priest, he wasn't a priest yet, but he took it and looked at it. And his father said, I want to show this to you. This is the crucifix, the cross that your mother held when she was in labor. She had it in her hand, and you can see on it, you can see the stains on it. He said, that's her blood. She held it so tightly, it cut her hand open. And she held that, cross until she gave birth to you. And then when she let go of it, after she died, I picked that up and I kept it. I kept it all these years, and I was waiting till you decided what you'd do with your life definitively. Then I wanted to give this to you. And he said, I want you to think every time you keep this crucifix in front of you, every time you look at it or hold it, I want you to think of your mom's sacrifice, first of all, what she did to give you life, that she gave her life for you. I also want you to know that your mother put all of her love and hugs and kisses and affection and all the things she would have wanted to give you, all her wisdom. She put all of that into this cross. So anytime you need any of that from her, I want you to take it, I want you to hold it, and I want you to draw that out of this. In other words, that crucifix is the symbol, compressed symbol of everything that her life, her death, and her love for that child represented. And I just thought that was so profound. What a way to use the cross as an interpretation of a human language of love. That's what it is. That's what God made it in Christ. And then this woman took that herself and then translated that to him. And then the priest said something really beautiful. He said, there's something about what my dad said. And it was not a dry eye, by the way, when he said it, because no one had heard this story. And then he said, I think I just maybe gave it away there. He said at the end of that story, he said, that child, that boy, and that man being ordained is me. And that was my mother. And he had never told that story before. It was very powerful. I'll never forget it. And then he said, there's also something analogous here to the Eucharist, to the Holy Mystery, as they call it in the Orthodox Church. They call the sacraments the mysteries in the Eastern Church. Same thing, same kind of basic idea. The Holy Mystery, he said, because, the Holy Mystery, right, when the consecration of the elements, the bread and the wine, takes place, in those elements, in those symbols, which are real symbols, not just imaginary, is compressed all of the love and the wisdom and the self-gift and the embraces of Christ himself for us now. The ones that he gave us from the cross are communicated to us through these holy mysteries, just like my mother gave me that symbol in this cross. So beautiful, powerful, kind of visceral way of seeing the cross, not simply as a symbol of pain and suffering and death, but rather a symbol of those things transformed by the power of love, by the power of mercy, by the power of trust, by the power of God in Christ, who, in rising from the dead, made that symbol into what it became. So the mystery of suffering, in that course, we talked a lot about, the messiness of human suffering, right? We never want to idealize suffering or romanticize it, right? I always like to say that people who write beautiful essays on suffering that are almost romantic and ideal, and you say, wow, I wish I could suffer. are writing that when they're not suffering. You write that when you're in the midst of tremendous pain. It's a different world. It doesn't mean that there's not the same profound meaning, but we don't want to, I don't want to, and I said that to the seminarians, idealize it, like it's suffering, redemptive suffering, which is profound, by the way. But it's so wonderful and great, and you're suffering right now, and shouldn't you realize that what you're going through is a gift, and it's so, human beings can't receive it like that generally. Maybe you have a few extraordinary saints who can, but the majority of us, myself, can't. It's messy. Mystery is messy. God's entering into our world of suffering is messy. I like to say that the Word became a mess and dwelt among us, right? A mess. So, another story I want to share. This is from a woman who wrote me. I have a blog that I write, and this is maybe 2014 or 2015. This woman wrote me an email about her situation because I had a post about suffering and redemptive suffering and the cross and how Jesus transforms our own pain into meaning and all that. And she wrote me and she was kind of telling me a little bit about her story, and she asked me for some advice. And I'm very, when people write me those kind of things, which I appreciate, I usually say my advice is, that you find someone near you that you can go to, that you can walk with, a priest or a spiritual guide or, counselor or friend. But anyway, but she shared her story, and I asked her after all the exchanges we had over about maybe 8 months, I asked her if I could share her story anonymously, and she gave me permission. So I'm going to share a little excerpts of it here, and it has to do with what I'm talking about here, the mystery of human suffering and how Jesus, who entered into that in his death and resurrection above all, has made possible a new way of experiencing and dealing with and being healed in our suffering. I'll call the woman Veronica just to keep her anonymous. So Veronica when she wrote me, had 5 children. She had 2 stillbirths, and very late term stillbirths. And any women out there, or anyone who's been associated with a woman who's given birth, stillbirth or miscarriage, for example, knows how difficult those are. And she suffered from postpartum depression. So you can imagine that. So she had 5 children. She had 2 stillbirths. So 7 times she had gone through postpartum depression. And she wrote this to me in the beginning. She said to me, "What do you do if you find yourself hating God because the anger and resentment in your life has nowhere to go?" So I wrote her some reflections about her longer email, about her own view of God. I encouraged her to go for some support, and I gave her some reflections, some meditations that I had from some sources I thought were really beautiful to read. And then I said to her, I recommend, do you go to adoration? She does go to adoration. I said, why don't you go to adoration and see if you can get a time alone in adoration? And I said, I said, speak your mind to Jesus in the chapel in front of the Eucharist with full honesty. Just let it out to him, whatever's there. And then just sit quietly and wait for a response, whatever happens. If you can do that, I told her I had done that previously. I'd known other people who had done it as well, and I had counseled people to do that. So afterwards, she wrote me an email response, which again, I asked her if I could share it. She said that I could. So she said this: "I wanted to let you know I've reflected much on some of what you have already shared with me, and I find my attitude starting to shift. Instead of viewing God as a taskmaster with impossible and impractical rules that are confusing and without meaning, I'm striving to look at him and talk to him as a friend who loves me with an inconceivable love and actually desires my happiness. God is still much of an enigma to me, and I'm still full of more questions than answers, yet I find myself desiring to trust more in his providence and in his wisdom than in my confusion and my weak faith. It's beginning to change some of my outlooks and attitudes. So thank you for being willing to help spark this transformation in me." Then 3 months later, so I didn't hear from her again, she wrote this follow-up. She said, "My husband encouraged me to take a step further and go to the chapel alone, as you'd recommended. I signed up as the only adorer. It was late in the evening, after the kids were in bed, but when I arrived at the chapel, someone else was there. I felt relieved. I was off the hook. I was afraid to open up the floodgates and tell God how I really felt. I felt it was irreverent. My anger, disappointment, even disbelief, which colored my desire to love him and believe in him. Then the other person in the chapel stepped out to take a call. I thought, well, this is it. And it all came out. A slobbering, sobbing mess. The poor man who'd stepped outside. I don't think he dared to come back in because my sobs were so loud. After it was over, I felt purged, like a great catharsis. And most astonishingly, after that outpouring of all my toxic waste, I felt loved. I just sat there quietly. And for the first time I can remember, I felt I was not defensive and hard. I was open to receive. I drank it in, kind of like I was dying for thirst. And I realized then all I do is give in my life, and all I want to have it, and I always want to have it together and be in control. I don't allow myself to be taken care of, to be loved, without it being a reward for something I've done. This is why I think I could never really pray. Again, thank you for giving me permission to pray as me. I can say that I think I have met the God of Jesus Christ, who, as your post said, has a, quote, furious love for me, end quote. I have never once in my life thought of him that way. The other night in the chapel, I not only thought it, I felt it. It was definitely furious and definitely love. So, I'd like to say, on the cross, God showed himself willing not simply to bypass our suffering and evil or explain it away or command it away, but rather God showed himself willing to enter our mess. As I said earlier, the Word became a mess and dwelt among us. Think about his birth. Think about his death. Think about all the mess between of his life. Every aspect of our life in its untidiness, he lived. And out of the mess, out of the ruins of Eden that we live in after the fall, Jesus rebuilt a masterpiece with his mercy. What is his masterpiece? His masterpiece is the saint, is the new creation, the new heavens and the new earth. And where did he begin that working of making saints? With the condemned criminal next to him that says, "Remember me, O Lord, when you come into your kingdom." That's where he began the work of the new creation, with a thief, a criminal who was crucified with him. Another story, my wife and I, we have 4 beautiful children. We're now all adults, and we have a grandson, Theodore. And but after our 4th child was born, my wife and I I think I may have mentioned this in a previous podcast, my wife, or she had 6 miscarriages. We did, she did, had 6 miscarriages, all at different stages. And I remember after the first miscarriage, which was the latest term miscarriage, after she had had the DNC and all of the things they had to do with that, it was so painful. And I remember she was back at our home recovering from everything, the surgery, And I remember she was in bed and she was crying and sobbing. And I remember being, the guy, right? You want to fix it. You want to do something to make it better, explain it or kind of whatever. And I couldn't do anything. I remember, so I went in the room there and she was just crying and crying. She, kind of balled up in her blanket and she was, over and over again saying very loudly, why, I remember she said, why did you put life in me and then tear it out? And I remember as I knelt there next to her, just I had nothing to say. There was a crucifix, a Spanish crucifix we had over our bed from the beginning of our marriage. We always had a crucifix over our bed. And I remember as she was saying that, without trying to trivialize the pain that she was going through, looking at that crucifix and thinking that hearing the Lord's voice, my God, why? Why have you abandoned me? And it was the only time I ever really saw that it wasn't just Jesus in that moment quoting a psalm so that he could fulfill a prophecy. He was taking up every why that every human being has ever screamed up from pain and suffering, and taking it up himself and speaking it to his Father. And of course, the Father's response, which seemed in the moment to be silence as he hung on the cross, on the third day, the Father's response arose and spoke that God hears every cry of every human being of all of history. In the third chapter of Exodus, when Moses is at the burning bush, God says, and I have it here, it says, the Lord said to Moses from the bush, I have seen the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know well their sufferings, and so I've come down to rescue them. And I always thought those verbs were so profound. And in that moment with my wife, I imagine this woman, Veronica, in front of the tabernacle, in front of the Eucharist exposed, felt that God saw and heard and knew well our sufferings. Right? God is not watching us from a distance. He's there, and he makes those cries his own, and then from the inside of that cry brings about the response, the resurrection, the healing, the rescue. So beautiful. I guess I had other thoughts to conclude with here, but I guess I'll just kind of end with that. The great gift of the resurrection of this season is not just, happiness and joy and being able to not have to do our Lenten penance anymore, which is, we can feast because we can. It's a season of feasting. But it's a season that also celebrates that the joy of Easter is what flows out of the profound conviction that even in our darkest, deepest, darkest hour, that God is with us and is doing something to respond to our plight, that there's a future opening up for us of hope, not only in the distant future after death, but in the future that is immediate in the present, that future that awaits us, that nothing we undergo is left without meaning because of the cross and the resurrection, because of the mercy, the divine mercy that God has shown us. Mercy being love encountering evil and suffering and healing it and overcoming it by entering into it. So let me end with a poem that is written by, actually I think I left the last page. I don't have the full poem here. I just realized I left the last page in my office. So with that unscripted ending, let me just, it's perfect. I'll end there. Mystery is messy. Thank you for joining me today. We'll look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks again on this podcast. Christ is risen.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Sharing the Faith podcast. If you would like to learn more about the podcast, visit ptdiocese.org/sharingthefaith. If you listen to the audio version through an app such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, be sure to rate, review, and comment. If you watched on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe or leave a comment on the episode. Thank you for listening.